Hello, I'm Mike Vinsel, and we are reading the illustrated story of Stephen Stroh by me, and story and illustrations by me. And this is Chapter 6, Killing Chickens. Saturday morning arrived clear and beautiful. Stephen got up, got dressed, and went up to the kitchen. Mr. Stroh sat at the table reading the Nashua Telegraph. "Good morning, Stephen. Do you have time for a cup of coffee with your father?" "Hi, Dad. Yes, I'd love one," Stephen said. He poured himself a cup from the percolator on the stove. "So what's the big plan for today? You going to the parade?" Mr. Stroh asked. "No, I'm going to Greg Edison's house to help him kill his chickens. He works at the orchard." "This Greg Edison raises chickens, and you're going to help him kill them? For meat?" "Nah, not for meat. We're just going to kill them for fun," Stephen said, attempting a joke, but quickly stepped back into line. "Just joking. Yes, for meat. You know, I remember when I was a boy, when I first had to kill a chicken," Mr. Stroh reminisced. "That was during the Depression. We were pretty well off compared to other people, but still, times were tough. I remember for school lunch, Mother made us lettuce sandwiches. Dad built a little chicken coop in the backyard. You know, he was born on a farm in Iowa. Funny thing is, he hated farming. That's why he worked as hard as he could to go to college, to get away from all that. But we had a little chicken coop. I remember that." He stared over his newspaper out out the window. "But killing chickens, you're going to get a good lesson in life, you know. You're going to get a good lesson in life. You know, I'm proud of you, Stephen. You're going to do well. Mark my word," said Mr. Stroh. "Thanks, Dad. Anyway, Greg's a pretty interesting guy. They have a big garden and keep pigs and chickens. We're going to kill 50 chickens today. I'd like to know how to do that. Grow my own food," Stephen told his father. 50? Well, that's a lot of chickens," Mr. Stroh said. Stephen explained. "Well, he has 2 kids. His wife is really nice. I like Greg. They have a deep freeze." "Well, like I said, you're going to learn a lot today. More than you would by going to the parade," said Mr. Stroh. Stephen made himself lunch, gulped down his coffee, and dismissed himself from his father. His mother was still upstairs. The Strohs lived on Filbert Hill. Every trip from home on his bicycle had a glorious start down the hill to Route 101. He would go into a tuck, going faster and faster down the hill. He'd reach a speed where it felt like he was flying. He called that experience escape velocity. Upon reaching escape velocity, his imagination was free to roam wherever it would go. This sunny Saturday, Independence Day, it returned to the subject of succession in the various plants and animals in forests. That had been on his mind lately. He contemplated the cycles by which forests worked. While his body rode the bicycle, his thoughts wandered outside his body, and he imagined the view he'd see if he were riding his bicycle above the treetops, and then higher. He looked around from that imaginary vantage point to the crest of Mount Monadnock in the distance, weather-worn and treeless. He knew the story of how it had become treeless, that ancient farmers had corralled wolves to the top and set fire to the forest to kill them. Then the thin alpine soil washed away without forest cover, and the artificial timberline still remains. One fire, Stephen realized in a few hours, had set back the clock of soil formation to the beginning of geological time. Then the thought occurred to him that forests don't work in cycles at all, except in a short-term way. He lectured out loud to himself while he rode. The passing of each year resembles a cycle, but each new season is always a little different from the one that happened the year before. Differences in growth rates between species, imperceptible year by year, result in shifting patterns of dominance and descent that would be obvious at 100-year intervals. Most of the trees in the forests he knew would not grow up in the shade cast by their parents. Stephen pedaled hard. To passing motorists, he must have seemed a dedicated cyclist. He rode so fast. He continued his oratory to himself. White pines are magnificent trees, but their dominance represents but a stage in the life of the forest. That grove of pines dominates the patch of forest where the fort was. Out of humor, he imitated the voice of Winston Churchill. Some with trunks 3 feet in diameter, their canopy so thick that the few unbranched young pines that struggle upward beneath them, the obvious offspring of those majestic giants, are so frail that they will not survive to continue white pine dominance. Their centuries are numbered. On a roll, he continued, It is the lowly hemlocks who bide their time, who quietly creep through that white pine canopy. It is they who will inherit lasting dominion. Oh, that's good, Stephen. Stephen did not see himself as a white pine. His father had joined the Navy during World War II and had made a career of it, spending 26 years. Joining the military back then was a different matter than joining it now, Stephen told himself, having dropped the Churchill impersonation. Military service is as noble or as ignoble as the actual cause for which one fights, not the cause for which one believes he fights. Credulity is seductive. Stephen, you are responsible if you indulge and are then deceived. He remembered the line from a Bob Dylan song he knew. Temptation's page flies out the door, you follow, find yourself at war. Was he going to be a hemlock? Try to eke out a living here in New Hampshire, under the shadow of his parents? That thought led him to the memory that somewhere he'd heard that coconuts have the rare ability in plants to tolerate salt. He'd heard that coconuts can drop into the sea and drift, and when they finally arrive on a suitable beach on some tropical island, they can sprout and begin their life. That's why most of the tropical islands around the world have coconut trees along their shores. Then he remembered poplar seeds again, drifting on the wind like tiny puffs of cotton. A bird eats a blackberry and deposits the seeds far away. But plants must rely on luck to land on suitable ground. People can move deliberately to suitable ground. But where is suitable ground for me? Hard saying, not knowing, he muttered in a New Hampshire accent. Stephen knew he could never buy a house or raise a family by working at the orchard. But for the half hour of this ride to Greg's house, he was happy just to be out on his own, heading to a day of killing chickens. Stephen was thrilled at the prospect of learning this new skill. He arrived on time at 10 o'clock. The Edisons were prepared. They had a 55-gallon drum full of water, supported by concrete blocks with a wood fire underneath. Jake and Zach fed sticks into the fire. The water was almost boiling. Stephen had never done what they were doing, and didn't want to look like a fool in front of the two boys, but he decided not to pretend anything. I've never killed chickens before. I hope I won't be too useless, Stephen said. We'll make good use of you. I hope you're not squeamish about blood, Cindy said. We're going to teach Stephen how this is done, she told her boys. She stood before a 10-foot length of 1 by 12 board nailed to a framework of 2x4s that would serve as a cutting board. Greg had cut the top and bottom off a 1-gallon plastic milk jug to form a wide-mouthed funnel with a handle. The heads of the chickens would be put through the mouth of the jug to restrain the chickens from moving while they were being killed. Greg held the first chicken by its legs. Somehow, perhaps by the gentleness of his hands, the chicken was calm. Greg stroked the sides of its head. He fitted the milk jug funnel over the chicken's head, enclosing its body snugly. Stephen noticed the facial expression of the chicken. To Stephen, the chicken had an earnest, calm look, as if there were nothing out of order. The curvature of the mandibles was set in an unchangeable expression of seriousness. Stephen remembered the same serious expression in a picture in a history book of General Eisenhower reviewing troops of the 101st Airborne Division on the eve of D-Day. Stephen knew that was a silly thought, and kept silent. Then it occurred to Stephen that lots of animals have facial expressions that have meaning for people. He wondered if this was universal among living things. People regard baby animals as cute and want to take care of them and see them do well. Do other animals recognize this? Stephen wondered. Of course, some animals, like hawks and fisher cats, have fierce facial expressions. They have no regard for cuteness in baby animals. Then he wondered about plants. Apples have spread around the world because people like them and have planted them everywhere. Just like the bird eating the blackberry, humans spread the seeds of apples. Stephen wondered about this while Cindy was explaining something to him. He realized that he had not been paying attention to what she had been saying. He was embarrassed and had at first tried to just start paying attention to her and try to deduce what she had been saying from the things she continued to say. But that wasn't working. So he apologized for not paying attention, saying he'd been lost in a daydream, and asked her to repeat what she'd been saying. Cindy laughed reassuringly. Don't worry, Greg's just like that. I was just saying that dunking the birds in the hot water loosens the feathers. I'll show you how to pluck them without tearing the skin, she said. Greg held the chicken's legs in one hand and the jug handle in the other, the bird's face down over a bucket. Jake used a pocket knife to cut the chicken's neck. He didn't cut off the head. He just slit the artery. Stephen had expected he would cut off the head. So you don't cut off the head? Stephen asked. Some people do. I leave it on because I think the brain keeps the heart pumping and that gets rid of the blood. You want to get rid of the blood, Jake said. With its neck cut, the chicken stopped being calm, but its movements were restrained by the plastic jug. Blood squirted neatly into the bucket with the pulse of the heartbeat, vigorously at first, then slowing to a trickle. Greg handed the lifeless chicken to Cindy. She wore rubber dishwashing gloves and a kitchen apron for this work. Wait just a second here. Okay, just a second. Right, and she wore rubber dishwashing gloves and a kitchen apron for this work. She held the chicken by the feet and dunked it in the scalding water in the drum for a few seconds. The hot water makes the feathers come loose. You want it just under boiling. These rubber gloves are perfect for this, Cindy said. Stephen watched as Cindy stripped the feathers into a cardboard box lined with a plastic garbage bag. After she had plucked the chicken, she showed Stephen how to gut it. She explained that the important thing was to keep urine and feces from touching the meat. That's true for butchering any animals. With pigs and deer, you have to be really careful, she said. With big animals, you can easily waste a lot of meat. Chickens are a good thing to learn on. Okay, so here's a picture that goes with that. So there's Greg in the red shirt there, and Jake, and then his wife, Cindy there, and Steven over here. And there's Zach bringing a chicken into the freezer. Okay. That's right. She cut off the head. Then she showed Stephen the delicate art of cutting around the vent and anus, how not to puncture any of the pipes inside. She pulled the guts out neatly onto the cutting board. She picked out the heart and liver and cut away the gizzard. These were put into separate bags for each. Then she used the hose to flush out the insides and rinse off blood. Dried the bird with a towel and handed it to Zach. He put it in a Ziploc bag and brought it inside to the deep freezer. You want to try? Cindy asked Stephen. Yes, he said. Cindy watched while Stephen stripped the feathers from the next bird. She helped him learn. She taught him to press his thumb firmly on the skin at the base of the feathers to keep the skin from ripping. Then he started the knife work. On one part he cut too deeply. Cindy pointed out the greenish liquid seeping out of the cut. That was feces. She explained that they wouldn't be able to use that part. Stephen felt foolish for having wasted most of a chicken, but Cindy reassured him that they had all made that mistake many times before, and they still do occasionally. Stephen gained confidence. He plucked, gutted, and cleaned 3 chickens successfully. He learned how to hold a live chicken by its feet and slip the milk jug funnel over its head to hold it still, and how to find and cut the artery. They killed and cleaned 50 broilers that day. After they cleaned up, Greg and Stephen got a shovel and took the bag of feathers and guts into the woods about 50 yards from the house. Greg explained that no matter how well you prepared it, the composting gut pile was going to smell awful. The important thing to know about getting rid of guts is that they can contaminate water, Greg said. On dry land, the nutrients in the rotting guts are fertilizer, but in water, they cause algae to grow. Streams and lakes are more sensitive than land that way. I put 2 bales of mulch hay and some limestone out here this morning, Greg said. They arrived at the spot. Greg cut the strings on the hay bales and spread the hay on the ground. He explained that hay was high in carbon, and carbon would absorb the nutrients in the guts. Greg told Stephen precisely, if the carbon to nitrogen ratio is right, bacteria and other soil microorganisms can break it down and make it into good soil, and it won't leach nutrients into the groundwater. Stephen hadn't known that Greg knew so much about soil science. Stephen had regarded himself to be knowledgeable about that and felt that he'd met a kindred spirit in Greg. He asked Greg where he had learned so much about soil science. Greg thought for a moment. I guess it was at the county farm. They had a composting program. It was a business. They sold bags of compost to Blue Seal Feeds and Agway. They taught us about what to do with everything. They mostly composted the manure from the dairy and egg farm they ran. It was pretty cool. They had these big concrete stalls where everything was composted. It's sort of like they taught us different recipes for composting. Greg and Stephen dumped the guts and feathers onto the hay, spread them out, and sprinkled them with limestone, a few shovels of forest soil as as an inoculant, covered that with hay, and then a few more shovels of soil to weight it down. On the walk back to the house, they talked. Stephen had known about compost, adjusting the pH with limestone, minding the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and using topsoil as a sort of sourdough starter for the pile. Stephen took pride in his knowledge of composting. He was impressed that Greg had an even better understanding of it. Greg had experience, and now so did Stephen. "Thanks for helping out today," Greg said. "Thanks for inviting me. I've never killed chickens before. That was really great," Stephen said. "Well, anyway, I don't know anybody else who would have wanted to come help kill chickens on the 4th of July. Do you like hearts, liver, and gizzards?" Stephen said he did. "Well, I can give you some of what we got today." "Thanks," said Stephen. When they arrived back at the house, Cindy gave Stephen a whole chicken and a bag full of livers and gizzards. She put the bags in a styrofoam cooler. Stephen duct taped the cooler to his bicycle rack. The following Monday morning, the outdoor crew assembled in their corner of the packing house. Ted Castro came out of his office to address them. The crew sat side by side on their bench as Mr. Castro began his briefing. "You men are soon going to be the honored hosts of a crew of 35 men from Jamaica, who will be arriving here at the end of August. Most of them have been coming here for many years, and we know them well. Others will be new to us." Ted Castro collected his thoughts for several seconds and continued. "It is my sincere desire that all of you will appreciate the opportunity this cultural exchange presents and will comport yourselves as ambassadors of your culture, and in turn will receive what you learn of their culture and their circumstances with goodwill." He strode slowly toward the window, looked out to the bunkhouses, hands clasped behind his back. "And now the practical matters of our being good hosts to these gentlemen turn to the condition of the bunkhouses. This week we will be cleaning the bunkhouses thoroughly. I'll show you what needs to be done. Follow me." The outdoor crew followed Ted Castro down the steps across the pavement to the first bunkhouse, the one with the kitchen. He opened the door, ushered the men inside, and propped the door open. "Let's get these windows open. We're going to be using trisodium phosphate to clean the kitchen and the shower room. TSP is caustic. Use these gloves. You don't want to get it on your hands if you can help it," Ted Castro said. There were 4 tall portable electric fans in the dining room. Ted Castro told Stephen to place them in the doorways of each bunkhouse, with one blowing in and one blowing out. After that, Stephen and Greg scrubbed the kitchen walls. The grease from the previous year's cooking had hardened on the walls around the stove and its vent. "But Jesus, this is going to take forever," Greg said to Stephen. "Yeah, I think this is the second time in my life that I've worn Playtex living gloves. The first was at your house yesterday," Stephen said. They imitated the television commercials and laughed. "Different subject. I want to get Jake and Zach a canoe. I'm collecting aluminum cans to save up the money. For a case of cans, I can get 24 cents. Can you save your cans for me?" "That's a great idea. Sure thing. I'll have to step up my drinking," Stephen said. "Thanks. I ain't proud," Greg said. Stephen was about to say that Greg should be proud, then remembered that night at Greg's house and stopped himself. Stephen focused his attention on scrubbing the walls and remembered back to his first day of school when he was 6 years old. His mother had gone with Philip and him to wait for the school bus. The 2 boys had got on the bus, sat down, and waved out the window to their mother. It was September. Stephen remembered looking out the bus window to the far edge of the swamp at the bottom of Filbert Hill. "Look, Phil, the leaves are red already," Stephen had said. Mrs. Stroh had told Philip to keep an eye on Stephen and to help him get along. But Philip would not be with Stephen inside the classroom. "Don't do anything too weird, okay? I mean, in school," Philip said. Stephen remembered asking Philip what kinds of things were weird. "I don't know. Just watch what the other kids do and act like that," Philip had said. They arrived at the Clark School. Stephen saw many children getting off other school buses. He realized for the first time that he would be put with hundreds of children. Just the previous June, his family had moved from Virginia after Mr. Stroh had retired from the Navy. So Stephen didn't know any of the other children. Stephen and Philip got off the bus. Philip took Stephen to the office and then went off to his own class. A nice lady named Mrs. Head, Stephen still remembered her name, led Stephen to room 14, Mrs. McGinnis's class. Stephen knew that he should sit down at a desk, but he didn't know if he could choose any desk he wanted. He was fearful of making a mistake in front of so many other children, so he chose a desk in the back row. He sat down and was relieved that the teacher didn't say anything about it. That day passed without anything bad happening. The next day, Stephen was more confident. Mrs. McGinnis had introduced herself the day before, so Stephen felt that he was not making any mistake in being where he was. Mrs. McGinnis handed out sheets of paper that she called newsprint. Stephen noticed that it had no print at all and wondered why she called it that. She explained that she was going to teach arithmetic. She started writing numbers on the blackboard with chalk. Stephen had seen the crossword puzzles his mother liked and the coloring books his sisters liked. He figured that Mrs. McGinnis was writing numbers on the board as entertainment for the children. Every summer, the Stroh family took long trips in the Volkswagen bus to visit the grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. They drove for hours to Kentucky, Buffalo, and even to Canada. Those were happy memories for Stephen. Before the trips, Mrs. Stroh would buy books of crossword puzzles, coloring books, crayons, and other things for the children on the long drives. Stephen had always preferred to draw pictures. He never cared for crosswords or coloring books. He just liked to draw pictures with regular pencils on regular paper. He remembered that he also liked looking out the window of the Volkswagen in farm country. He loved looking down the rows of cornfields, the visual effect of being able to see far down each row for a split second as they passed by. There in Mrs. McGinnis's classroom, he started drawing a picture. It was a dogfight between a Sopwith Camel and a Fokker triplane in World War I. He knew from looking at books with his father that the famous Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, had been flying a Fokker DR-1 triplane painted red when he was shot down and killed by Roy Brown, a Canadian who flew a Sopwith Camel. Stephen couldn't read at that time, but his father had pointed out those facts as they looked at the book together. Mr. Stroh had told Stephen that for most of the war, Richthofen flew an Albatross airplane. Stephen enjoyed those times with his father. His father had explained that actually it might not have been Roy Brown who shot down the Red Baron. It might have been a guy on the ground shooting a machine gun. They didn't know for sure. Mr. Stroh had explained that to Stephen. That day, his second day of school, Mrs. McGinnis wrote numbers and symbols on the blackboard and explained to the other children what they meant. She called on the other children. She called on the other children to answer questions. and most of the children answered her questions correctly. Stephen was engrossed in his picture, carefully using the technique he'd learned from his Uncle Joe of holding the pencil flat, using the side of the lead to make a broad stroke instead of a thin line. Stephen found this technique to be very useful for shading and drawing smoke. He drew two airplanes in dramatic positions in a dogfight, Richthofen coming down from behind and above a Sopwith Camel. Stephen knew, of course, that this wouldn't have been Roy Brown's Sopwith Camel. Stephen drew smoke streaming from the plane, using his thumb to smudge the image. As a finishing touch, he used the eraser to make wisps of flame from behind the engine cowling. He was just finishing it up when Mrs. McGinnis called on him to answer an arithmetic question. Stephen looked up to the teacher. She repeated the question. He told Ms. McGinnis that he'd been doing something else. He held the picture up for the other kids and the teacher to see. Stephen had been accustomed to being complimented on his artwork. The other children were impressed. He remembered Stephen Spain saying, "Nice shot." Okay, here's the picture that goes along with that. So there's Stephen in the back chair, and there's the picture. All the kids looking, and there's Mrs. McGinnis, maybe looking a little bit concerned here. Okay. Mrs. McGinnis appeared to be holding back her praise. Perhaps, Stephen had figured, so as not to create jealousy among the other children. With a plain face, she told Stephen to stay after class while the other children went to recess. Stephen said he would, and the teacher moved on to another child. At recess, Stephen remained in his seat as told. When the other children had gone, Stephen had expected Mrs. McGinnis to compliment him on his artistic ability. But that's not what happened. Mrs. McGinnis didn't say anything about Stephen's picture. She stayed at her desk looking at papers. Then, without looking at Stephen, she barked, "Go stand in the corner." Stephen didn't understand what she meant. He got up and walked toward one corner, looking over his shoulder, waiting for further instruction, not knowing he was being punished. "Okay, what do I do?" he asked. Mrs. McGinnis rose from her chair and walked toward Stephen. He stood, body facing the corner, neck crook to see her as she approached, confused by her hostile facial expression. Mrs. McGinnis clasped the top of Stephen's head, turned it around to the corner, and with her other hand on Stephen's back, pushed him into the corner, holding him there. "You're going to stand here until the bell rings. Then go to your next class. Don't ever pull a shenanigan like that again, in my class again," she said, and she went back to her desk. Stephen stood facing the corner. He had not known he was not supposed to draw. He began to cry. He cried silently, afraid of further punishment. He would miss recess. How he would have liked to talk to that boy Stephen Spain who had liked his picture. Anger arose in Stephen. He hadn't known that school was not play. Nobody had told him. Back at the orchard, scrubbing the bunkhouse kitchen, age 19, Stephen remembered that after 1 week in first grade, he was moved to readiness room. That's when they started him on the pills. Readiness room was mostly play. Little by little, they introduced the idea of compulsory work. The next year, he would start first grade again. Almost finished scrubbing the bunkhouse walls, the idea occurred to Stephen that being punished for drawing that picture had had a permanent impact on him. He had responded with defiance and had carried that defiance all the way through to when he graduated from high school. "Damn, Steve, that's like Cool Hand Luke. You see that movie?" Greg said, startling Stephen out of his daydream. "Yeah, I saw Cool Hand Luke," Stephen said. "You know that scene where they're oiling the road and Luke starts working so fast and they finish early?" Greg said. "Yeah," Stephen said. "That's you. It was all I could do to keep up with you, and now we're done," Greg said. Stephen and Greg Edison had finished the kitchen. They moved on to help Holmes scrub the shower room. The other men scrubbed floors and walls and set up folding beds, beat mattresses and hung them on poles to air in the sunshine. Just before 2:30 break, Anton brought in a record player. It had settings for 33, 45, and 78 RPM discs. A 15-bushel bin stood on its side, served as the table for the record player. "The Jamaicans have great music. They bring boxes full of records, stuff you could never find here," Anton said. "What kind of music?" Greg asked. "Lots of stuff. Reggae, calypso, soul, steel drum music. Some stuff I don't even know what it is, but it's all good. I got a pretty good collection down at my house," Anton said. On break, the crew sat on the bunks listening to Anton. Stephen tried to imagine what it would be like when the Jamaicans arrived. Wooden one-bushel boxes stood beside each bed to serve as nightstands. Ted Castro arrived with a laundry bag filled with curtains that Doreen had washed. After break, the crew hung them on curtain rods above each window. They were of several unmatching patterns, but when they were all up, they gave the room a cheerful atmosphere. Then Ted Castro summoned the men to attention. He sat down on a bunk and gestured for the crew to sit down. He gathered his thoughts to say something important. "I've inspected the kitchen, the dining room, kitchen and the dining room area, and I want to express my satisfaction in and gratitude for your work. Stephen and Greg, in all the years I've been manager of this orchard, I've never seen the kitchen cleaned so well. I've inspected each bunkhouse, and likewise I am pleased. I extend my thanks and gratitude to you, Bud, and you, Jesse, and George, and yes, Arthur. And last but not least, I have inspected the shower room and found it also to be quite satisfactory. Thank you, Holmes. You have earned your pay," Ted Castro said. Ted Castro sat, feet on the floor, hands clasped to the steel bed frame. He looked out the window and continued to speak. "Those of you who've worked the harvest here already know this, so bear with me as I explain what I'm about to say to the new men," he said. "The Jamaican men who are coming here are not coming here directly from Jamaica. Most of them are coming here from Florida, where they will have spent the last 8 weeks cutting sugarcane. Some of them will be coming here from Kentucky, Virginia, and Connecticut, where they are now picking tobacco." He paused, not looking away from the window. "Here they will be paid 44 cents a bushel. You will all experience the pleasure of picking apples. Paula Red is an early variety that ripens before the Jamaicans arrive. You will pick the Paula Reds. I'm sure that will make you thankful that you are paid by the hour, as meager as that may be. In November, they will leave here. Most of them will not go home to Jamaica. They will return to Florida for the second cutting of sugarcane, or to pick citrus. Most of these men only spend a month or two of each year in their home country with their families. So it is again my sincere hope that you will all endeavor to make their stay here as pleasant as we can make it." And he ended his speech. The next day, the mattresses were on the bunks, and the bunkhouses were ready for the Jamaicans. With that done, it was time to prepare the orchards themselves for the harvest. 15-bushel bins were slightly wider than they were long, so one bin on its side could fit inside another, and a third would fit upside down on top. So 3 bins could be moved as one unit, called a stack, by the forklift. The bins were made of white oak. They were strong enough that full bins could be stacked 10 high in the cold storage buildings. The corners were bound with steel clips, allowing for damaged panels to be replaced. Damaged bins could be cannibalized to fix other bins. Bins had to be placed throughout each orchard block. The cutter bars on the Ford 2000 and the 601 were replaced with sets of forks for moving bins. But before they could be taken to the orchard blocks, the bins had to be inspected for damage. Anton unstacked bins with the forklift from the stack of hundreds behind the big garage. Greg, Holmes, and Stephen separated the stacks and inspected each bin. Arthur Broccoli showed how to remove and put on the clips. He showed what damage was tolerable and what needed to be fixed. It occurred to Stephen that there were many things to consider in the design of a wooden box. Most of the bins were okay and were loaded onto the 2 flatbed trucks. The next morning, Stephen drove the Ford 2000 to the Haney. Greg drove the forklift. They arrived a few minutes before Anton arrived with the truck loaded with bins. Jesse, Bud, and Brock did the same with the 601. The other truck and forklift at another block. Greg unloaded the bins and put them at the edge of the loading area. When the truck was unloaded, Anton went back for another load. Stephen and Greg distributed the bins in the orchard, starting at the far end. Anton had told them that one big tree can fill a bin. An average tree would yield 10 bushels. Stephen and Greg used this advice to guide where they would put the bins. They could spread the bins out in the orchard block faster than Anton could load up and drive back again, so there was sometimes an hour to wait. While Stephen and Greg waited for Anton, they heard the call of a pheasant. They both had noticed that pheasants love apple orchards. Greg told Stephen that only male pheasants call, and that they usually do it from a conspicuous place. There was a good chance that they might see it. They crept quietly between the rows of trees, narrowing in on where the sound had come from. The air was strangely quiet as they stalked the bird. Then, just as Greg had said, there it was, a ring-necked pheasant standing proud on a stone wall at the edge of the block. It called out again, "Chee-chee! Chee-chee!" Then the pheasant saw Greg and Stephen. It slunk behind the stone wall out of sight. Greg gestured silently for Stephen to follow him. They crept quickly and silently to where the stone wall crossed another stone wall about 100 feet up from where they saw the pheasant disappear. They crept to the corner, and Greg jumped up onto the wall. The startled pheasant exploded into flight, rising straight up and then angling out across the orchard to the woods on the other side. Stephen was impressed that Greg knew where the pheasant would be. They call loud, but when they see a predator, they get down behind some cover and creep away from that spot. If there's some long straight cover like a stone wall, they will follow it for about 100 feet, then hide, Greg explained. Anton arrived with another load of bins. It was getting late, so Anton waited while Greg and Stephen spread them out. They would be back in the morning, so they left the Ford 2000 and the forklift at the block and rode back to the packing house in the truck with Anton. As the outdoor crew members got ready to go home, Ted Castro came out of his office for an announcement. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm here to inform you that the outdoor crew will soon be losing a member. Alan Charles Doyle, Holmes, as we all know him, will be returning to Chapel High School for this coming school year. Today I attended a conference with him and the principal, and recognizing the value of his work experience here, they've agreed to let him return as a sophomore. As sorry as I am to lose a crew member, I'm certain that he's made the right decision. Okay, that's the end of chapter 6.